running? Okay. Welcome back to Happy Town, y'all. Let's check out some completed code here. So in our second example, what we wanted to do was use the admin hook. So all we were doing was we had the exact same code. This should all still be working properly. And instead of using the enqueue scripts that would display it on the front end, we're using this hook admin enqueue scripts, and that will load our code on the back end. So if we activate this plugin and pop open the console, anywhere in the admin area, we will see this code. So that works well for us. Then in the final example, same thing, except now we have a little bit more PHP code going on. So for the sake of y'all who haven't built plugins and might want to use this as like a little template later on for building a plugin, what we have at first is we're setting the URL of the menu. And this is why I said don't activate too many of these at once, because if you have the same URL structure for the same plugins, that's going to be an issue. And just remember that, like, if you wanted to create a plugin, you probably wouldn't want to name your string edit because there's already going to be one in the admin area. So again, this is why namespacing various places is a helpful thing. Okay? Then this function here is just adding a link to the admin area. I won't go into all the different things there, but you could search for add menu page, and then you'll see the different parameters, and it should make just sense by looking at it, kind of what that's doing. Then this is some horrible best practice for putting a bunch of HTML right inside our PHP template. Of course, you'd want to abstract this out into an actual template, do this a little bit cleaner, but for our purposes, it's okay. And I'll also mention that, again, this is all PHP stuff, but in WordPress, all text should be passed through something that could be filtered and translated. So if I just said here, give me an H2 with JS for WP plugin, that would be a problem because that could never be translated into Spanish or German or Portuguese, whatever. So whenever you pass stuff through, you want to make sure that's translatable. And then just in case somebody tries to do some like hacky, I got your site now JavaScript, it's also going to strip out tags like that.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Do you have your mic on? I was getting you, but I noticed that the key.
Y'all are going to learn this so well because I'm going to teach everything twice. Okay, let's just start again at the top here. What we've got is we're setting up the URL, we're setting up a page. All this stuff is PHP. It's not as important for us. What we really want to do is come down into our back-end scripts. And I mention this because what we probably want to start doing is having both front-end scripts and back-end scripts. We can't put them into the same function because they're tying into different hooks. And weird things will start happening if you try to start hooking in things when they're not supposed to be there, right? This is a perfect example. So we don't want all of a sudden some admin.js to be going off on the page asking or telling them that they did some error wrong when really they're just trying to read a blog post, right? So break those two up, and we're making sure we use admin enqueue scripts. And then we're throwing in this extra code here just to make sure that it's only loading on our page. So if I come into plugins and I activate 2.3 completed, notice that it's going to throw up this link over here that was setting up our admin. This is that page HTML that's hard-coded. And if I pop open my console, I should see that there is now backend plugin loaded. But if I go to a tools section or another page, notice that it's not there. Okay? Again, with just this little bit of code, you could build a whole Vue app right here. And you could have it hooking into all the stuff that you need. So if you ever wanted to create a WordPress plugin and power the whole thing with JavaScript, it's just these few lines that will kick everything off, and then it's all in the API to do whatever you want. Okay, so we'll show that stuff later, but we needed to get this far. Any questions about difference between working with a plugin and working with a theme in terms of enqueuing JavaScript? Preguntas. Y'all got it. See, I told you, it's going to become second nature. How many people don't know what WP enqueue script does at this point? Success. We have learned how to enqueue JavaScript. We're bored with it. We want to move on. So let's get weird and look at some Ajax in WordPress. And I have to warn you that Ajax is a little weird in WordPress. And if you've ever worked with Ajax and PHP, the way it usually works is you have some JavaScript that's going to make a call off to a certain PHP file. The PHP file is going to run some code and then return some code back that the AJAX request will wait for. Now you can make really simple AJAX requests like, hey, just go to my home page and scrape all the data and give it to me, and then I'll do something with it. But when I talk about AJAX in this context, I'm really talking about AJAX that is interacting somehow with the WordPress backend and code. So like in the AJAX example we're going to do, you click a button and it likes something and adds it to the database and then gives you back the updated value and that you could update on your site. Okay, so when I say AJAX in WordPress, I don't mean from a purely technical level anything that's sending off an XML HTTP request. I'm talking about specifically doing something that's going to interact with the database or the code in WordPress that we kind of want to have protected, and there's a few extra steps along the way there. So the first thing we have to do is inside of our PHP, remember how we could pass in stuff through localized script? We're going to be passing in a nonce and a URL. A nonce is a number used only once, and it's a unique string, and WordPress will generate it for us when the page is loaded, and then if we make any AJAX requests, it's going to look for that exact same string back to verify. So if somebody, let's say we know the URL in WordPress and we want to ping it and make a request from some other site onto ours, if we don't have that nonce attached to it, it will refuse it. So this is one of the validation methods that WordPress uses, and very helpful for us. Also the URL. Our code that we're going to run is in our functions.php file for themes. So even if it's in a plugin, how do you get that URL? Like, do you type in site.com/wp-content/plugin/myplugin/assets.js themes? No. We have to route everything, every single AJAX call in WordPress goes to a single URL. And then WordPress mechanics behind the scenes figures out what function and where should process that call. So we're passing a unique nonce every time and the exact same URL. Okay, so all AJAX requests are basically going to get the same URL but a different nonce each time. Then in our JavaScript, we need to actually make that call, right? So jQuery is pretty easy for this. There's native fetch. There's Axios, which we'll look at as well. There's a lot of different ways. Hey, you could even use a straight up HTTP request. I wouldn't recommend it, but it's all possible. But you have to pass this nonce and the URL back in a very specific way. So that's the part I want to show you, and that's where we're going to be copying and pasting is, hey, right here in our AJAX call, we won't type out the whole thing. I'm going to assume at this point you've probably seen a jQuery AJAX call in your life, so it won't leave you shaking in your boots, and it's really just figuring out how to pass the nonce and the URL. Then we need to have, so the AJAX call is made into WordPress, then we need to pass it to the right place, so there's some hooks involved, and then we have the PHP call that actually, or the PHP function that actually processes, gets the code, and gives us back the data, and then the JavaScript on the other end. So step one, not normal in all AJAX. Step two, maybe it's normal, maybe it's not, depending on security methods, but not always. Three, definitely not normal, right? We don't normally build a PHP app that like interjects all AJAX requests and filters and redirects them on their own, but WordPress will. And step four is completely normal, right? So steps 2 and 4 and 5 you have to have every time. So we're just adding in this extra hook and the passing out the nonce. Luckily, this is mostly stuff that we've done already. So this should look familiar, right? What's the only thing that's new here? Maybe someone could shout out. What do you see in here that's new that we haven't seen before?
Dependencies, AJAX URL and nonce.
So you're right, well, you're right that it looks like a dependency, but because we're in WP localized script, this is actually the content that's being pushed out to the front end of the site. But yeah, the admin URL and the WP create nonce. So admin URL is going to give us this. Remember I said all AJAX requests go to a single URL, then WordPress redirects them? This is it, admin AJAX. And if you ever hear people talk in WordPress about, oh man, admin AJAX is this and admin AJAX is that, and like, dude, I gotta use admin AJAX, or all this stuff. You'll hear it eventually if you hang around long enough, or you won't because you'll just use the API. This is what the admin AJAX is doing. And then the nonce, WP create nonce, is going to create this on the fly, a little string of text, and we can name nonce name whatever we want. I suggest you namespace it and you make it specific to what the actual thing is. So we'll see something like JS for WP likes nonce, for example, and that'll be like our namespace unique nonce. Then we make our JavaScript call. So this is just the jQuery Ajax. But notice a few things specifically. For the URL, we're passing in that Ajax URL, the admin Ajax URL that we just got. And then in our data, first let's look at the admin Ajax nonce. Notice this underscore Ajax underscore nonce. It needs to be in that format. So we can't just pass data nonce is equal to JS for WP globals nonce. We have to name it underscore Ajax underscore nonce. So this is, again, one of the weird things. And then action is going to be the name of the function in our theme or plugin file that we want to hook into. So in our functions.php or in our plugin file, somewhere we have a PHP function called JS for WP add like. Step 3 is inside. Notice now we have this function called JS for WP add like. We're checking the Ajax refer. So this is where we put in nonce name. Whatever we named it before, we name it here. And if this fails, so if they passed in a nonce but it was the wrong one, it will exit out and nothing else will happen. Otherwise, we're setting up some custom code here to basically take our response. In this case, we only have one thing in our response. We're setting success equal to true. And even though, so when you run a jQuery or an Ajax call, it will tell you if the call failed or not, right? You'll get some sort of method back. But what it won't tell you is that the actual WordPress code that you tried to run was successful. So for this reason, oftentimes you'll see people hard coding in a success or failure response with specific information. So let's say that in our example, we're updating the database. If that database update doesn't go through, I can control and say response success is equal to false, and then have more refined control in my JavaScript what's really going on in terms of error reporting. In this particular example, we want our response to be in JSON format, so we're wrapping our response in JSON encode, echoing it out, and then dying, because again, this function is going to kind of live in invisible space. WordPress will kick it out there, the Ajax hits it, grabs the data, it disappears and then goes. So we're not returning, right? It's echoing it out, we're not returning anything back, and we're not, what would other things that you could do with the function be that we're not? We're not putting it into a template, we're not actually loading it onto the page, it's just kind of appearing in memory, I guess, and then we access it, pull it out, and then we're done. The other weird thing, not the last weird thing, but we're getting there. See this hook down here? WP Ajax underscore, and then our name of our function again. This is one of the last weird naming conventions. That underscore Ajax nonce is one of them, and this is another. So anytime we set up any Ajax, we have to follow this convention, and it's a little repetitive. I don't know why you couldn't just say WP Ajax and then pull it in. Well, I do, but it's a little redundant, but this is the way it has to go, okay? So once that happens, back in our front-end JavaScript, this code was part of the bigger one. I'm just breaking off the part of it. When the Ajax call is successful, it comes back. And then notice that this response type, success, I set that. That was my own custom response. So jQuery already succeeded when it hit the success and is running this code. But I added an extra layer in, and I could say, OK, now go do my code. And if it's not successful, then I could give it some specific message and be more detailed about exactly what I want back. So again, these are the different steps, and this is the last thing I want to hit before we go into break, because after this, when we come back, then we'll start looking at just the API, and we'll focus on that for the rest of the day. So this is the kind of culmination of the old school JavaScript for WordPress. And in the examples, here's what we're doing. So we're going to make a little like this site plugin, and it saves likes as a number in the WP options table. Outside the scope of this course, but WP options is kind of a free-for-all place to throw in small bits of data that you need, and WP post meta is another. If you need it to be associated with a post, you could do it that way. You don't want to get carried away with the options table, but for one entry with just the number of likes on the site, it's perfect. So we'll display the total number of likes on the front end, and when you click on a link, it increases the count with Ajax. And because not everybody is big on jQuery, and because sometimes you'll need to run some Ajax using a different library that doesn't usually use jQuery, like a lot of folks who use Vue prefer Axios, then I have an example where you could do the exact same thing we do with jQuery, just with a different library, because how you set stuff up is slightly different. So we'll do the jQuery together, and then on your own you can play with the Axios, and we'll kind of break at that point. So let's go ahead and look at this together, shall we? I know we're so close, y'all. Come on now. Ajax and WP. Go ahead and copy over all of these 3.1 through 3.2 files into your plugins folder. So again, we're copying just over our 3.1 files into our plugins folder. And let's go into our plugins.
Zach, is your volume turned down all the way up? No, I'm sorry, on your laptop.
Up?
Down, all the way off. I thought I heard.
No, I think it's off.
Okay. If anyone in the audience has their laptop volume up, please
Phone's off.
turn
Okay.
it all the way down. Thanks.
Somebody's coding too loud. It's a problem. Okay. So let's come down and activate 3.1 jQuery example. All right. And now, again, we need to make sure that we're not opening the actual example files that were in the repo, but we're opening the ones that are in our plugins directory. So I'll just grab that and pull it into my editor. And now I've got my plugins here. All right. So in our README, there's a few steps here, right? We've got to set up the enqueue to pass in all the data. We've got to hook in our Ajax function. We've got to make the actual Ajax call in our JavaScript, and then we've got to test out that it works. Okay? So let's start up by going into our main plugin file. We're going to look for our scripts, find localized scripts, and we're basically just going to make sure that we're passing in the URL we need, the total number of likes that are currently in the database, and then the nonce. Okay? So that's our first step. We'll open up our main plugin file. And we already have this done for us, so nothing we need to change here. And again, because we've done this so much, we won't go through the practice of changing those values every time. But what we do need to change is all of this. So let's just do some quick copy and paste here, make it easy. We're going to change Ajax URL to admin URL, adminajax.php. Total likes is equal to, and this is why the options table is so easy. Look how easy it is to pull in a value from the database. Just get option and then the option we want. And it was actually up here further in our code. At the very top we see, hey, are there any likes currently? And if it's null, then go ahead and set likes equal to 0. So that's how we get the number to start off. Get option and add option are very simple, and if you ever want to start storing stuff in the database, little things, that's a really easy way. And then finally, we need to create the WP nonce. And again, I like to name them something that is going to make sense for what it is, and sometimes I'll even just add the word nonces, even though it's repetitive, just to make it clear for me what I'm working with. Show me what you're working with. Okay, so we've got all that set up. Let's see, the next step was to hook in our Ajax function. Okay, so this is going to run once our JavaScript executes. And we want to find the add action function directly after JS4WP add like. Okay, so let's go check that out. Here's JS4WP add like. And well, we'll get to the add action in a moment, but there's something up here. Notice that check Ajax refer doesn't match what we just set it to. So this name here, create nonce, needs to be the exact same as what we see down here, nonce to check. So we'll paste that in. That works. And just to show you what this is doing is saying it's getting the value of the database, it's increasing it by 1, and then it's updating the option and passing in the new number. And this could definitely be consolidated onto fewer lines, but just trying to make it clear. And then we're saying if this goes through, so if the update passes, then go ahead and set my response total likes to new likes and set the response type equal to success. So this is going to be the data. So because we have response total likes, it's being JSON encoded, that will turn into response.totallikes and response.type when we get it back on the front end. Now the last thing we have to do is this WP Ajax your hook and your hook right here have to both be changed to JS for WP add like. And what that's going to do is say whenever there's an Ajax request coming in for this function, then go ahead and call this function, which is, again, right here. Super redundant, but this is just how Ajax works. And once you know these few steps, it's fine. You'll also notice, because I wanted to simplify this, there's some extra code that I'm not showing you that's put out into a little library folder that we will ignore for now. But just so you know, if you want to explore some of the other stuff that's going on, because there is a back-end page, and I'll show you that in a second, but we won't go through all the code. It should already be working. All right, so now we need to come into our JS front end, and we've got some things to change here. All right. So change the HTML value to response total likes. Because we set this up in the back end and we passed it back here, we could simply do this. So response, just like global variables we set, is available to us. It's getting kicked back. And now we need to, oh, okay. This is going to load initially. So when the page loads, this will determine what the total likes are to start. And then here's our Ajax call. And we need to update a few things: the URL, the data action, and the data Ajax nonce. Again, this is a little bit weird format, just keep that in mind. So we'll change our URL. That's going to go to admin Ajax. We'll change our add like. Oh, that was already. And then our nonce is right here. Let me double check. Yeah, okay. Should we try it? Who thinks it's going to work? Did we miss a step? Let's come check our README. Okay, changed all that stuff. I think there's one last thing. Yes. Once it is successful, then we want to change the count to the total number. So then we pass in response total likes again, which has been updated and given us to us. So that should fix everything. Now let's go ahead into our site. We activate 3.1 jQuery example. And you'll love how much broken this is. Okay, let's see what's going on. Response is not defined in front end. Oh, yeah, because the first time we get it, it is it's actually JS for WP globals. So the first time the page is loaded, this localized script kicks off, but it's important to note that localized script is not updated every time you make a new Ajax call. So this is good for the first load of the page, but after that, it's static and doesn't get re-pushed out to the site. So the first time we get the total count, we have to do it that way. And then the second time, we should be able to get response. So sorry, that instruction is a little off. I'll make sure to change that in the examples. 0 likes. Woohoo, look at me go. No validation. I don't even remember if it's set to, you do have to be logged in. So because it's relying on sending out that nonsense stuff, it's not going to let us perform this if we're not logged in, which is a good thing. But you'll also notice that on the back end now, in our admin page, we could reset it to 0. So remember I said there's this extra library folder, and it's just the exact same code except showing you how to reset all the data to 0. And now if we look at our site, it will be set back to 0 and we could do the whole thing again. So again, this code is going to be something you want to save as an example because at some point you might need to use it, but we're kind of moving past this direction of, in terms of architecture of how we're interacting with Ajax. It's being driven a bit more API instead, which is what we'll look at moving forward. But from here, there are two things that you could try. The first is you could go back and look at the library folder and look at the plugin page. And this has some code that is running something very similar, but it's resetting everything to 0 using Ajax. And there's a backend main.js. Because what happens is sometimes folks get like the code that shows, hey, here's how you do this on the front end, but then it's confusing. Like, I don't know how to translate that to doing it on the back end in a plugin. So I'm giving you both there. And then because jQuery is not everybody's jam, there's also an Axios example. So we won't go into that there, and that's kind of on your own to play with, but I'll show you just one small piece of code that's going to be kind of the main difference, is that notice that this is called params. I think that's basically it. And then it's using a slightly different format in terms of how data is coming back and how you access that. So those two are really the only things. The rest is pretty much the same, but these are the things that have to be right. Everything else you could swap out and change to your heart's desire. So at this point, we have so confidently plowed through so much, and everything else out from here is going to be looking at the API and how do we get this in themes and plugins and decoupled apps, okay? So are there any questions before we take a break at this point in terms of Ajax? Y'all nailed it. Great. Okay. Glad we got it. Feel free now if you want to go back and peruse anything, if you want to ask me questions about something specific. But what we'll do is we'll take a break now, and then we'll pick up with the WordPress REST API from there.
Is the break lunch, or is what time are you thinking lunch happens?
Actually, yeah, no, I didn't know if I say that for camera. Like, come on, video people, join me for a meal. But yeah,
for an hour.
It's
Yeah.
lunchtime. It's walk around time. Let's take a break.
Let's just do a 45-minute lunch break. Should we?
Yeah.
So we can keep on schedule.
Okay.
So we'll pick back up in 45 minutes.
Anybody have that familiar my brain?
Oh, I guess now we have a couple of questions. Did we cut yet, or are we still going?
Did not cut, let me zoom in.
Yeah, let's. Okay, we got a
Do you
few
have some-
questions from online.
I've got a.
Well, yeah, Myra is just saying, looking for the solution on front-end main.js, which you kind of already showed, right?
For front end main, for the JavaScript or for the jQuery one. Yeah, that was what we just went over.
Right, yeah, so she can catch up on the video there. And then can we make the short code go to the API? I'm not sure what, I guess discussing short codes.
Yeah, so this is a place where, oh man, I need to give some context to explain what they're asking. So you can
We
run,
can ask him to clarify, and we can go over to after the break too.
in WordPress, there are what are called shortcodes, and these are things that, I forget the exact format. No, it's not that. It's in the content editor, let's say you wanted to do a grid that was 2 columns, right? You can't actually throw in all the div and all that stuff there. So there's a format of using what are called shortcodes in WordPress. And you can in PHP, I think it's something like this. Or another one might be a contact form. So because this is PHP that's generated, you can't just pass it in with the localized script and necessarily expect it to work, because this is going to fire off a bunch of stuff. What you could potentially do, I don't know, that would be a little bit tricky. Basically, you would have to get it into some sort of format that could then be sent via JavaScript. And when I mentioned at the very beginning JS widgets, this is one of the things, I know it's not a short code, but they're trying to figure out how to do, like, how do we take stuff that's so dependent on PHP and make it available in JavaScript. So I need to dig a little bit deeper. My short answer is I don't think that's going to work. But what you can do is try it, and just where you see localized scripts, say something like and see what you get. My guess is that that is not going to work, but it may. I'd be curious.
And Myra was just asking about that replacement for a response. It's JS4WP_globals, right?
Yes, it is. It's exactly what we set right here.
Instead of the response for the initial load.
Yep, for the initial load, because we're getting that from here, and then we don't get a response back till after we make the jQuery call. So you have to, the response is going to come inside of that. Sorry, let me just pull up the. Yeah, so we can't use response until we get this success back. Then we could use response.totalLikes. Before this AJAX call is made, we have to depend on the global variables that we set up of total likes. And that comment was wrong, so I'll make sure that gets fixed. What did us do with us? Other questions? All right, y'all learned it. Let's take a little break, shall we?
Yep.
Okay.
Break for 45 minutes.
Said 4 to 5 minutes. You want some stickers? That usually cheers me up.
Stickers.
Right.
What's up? We're good. Just cut the stream and do the 45 minutes.